In this video, I've condensed my experience during my 4 years in GCSEs and A-levels into my top 5 tips that I used to get grade 9s and A stars. There are 5 brutally honest pieces of advice that got me grade 9s at GCSE and A stars at A-level. The first point is you have to actually try and end of topic tests. Every student thinks that just because these aren't your actual exam, they don't matter and you can just do the work when the time comes. This might work for some people, but for the majority, including myself, it doesn't. Doing the work wrong. The important work isn't just a few months or weeks of revision leading up to your exam, it's the work during your entire time in GCSE. You may think that revision for an end of topic test at the start of year 10 is completely pointless because by the time you get to the exam you just won't remember it. But just because it isn't in your conscious awareness doesn't mean that when you revisit the content it won't come back to you much easier and be reinforced much stronger with a much greater understanding. The thing is, most of you already know this, but you just don't want to accept it because it means doing the hard work now. My next piece of advice is to do active recall. I hear about the importance for active recall almost all the time, but the thing is almost every student doesn't do it. Instead they just sit for hours making notes and using highlighters to make their notes look pretty or to try to remember key points. And in the moment it might feel like it's working, but I'm sure as a lot of you find out in the long term, it eventually just doesn't. Any information that does manage to stick from that is very weakly reinforced and it will just slip out of your long-term memory or at least into distant memories that you just can't retrieve. This is why you need to use active recall, because it strengthens the literal neural connections in your brain and reinforces your ability to dig out information out of your long-term memory and then makes it even easier to do so in the future. Almost as if the information was a step closer to your conscious awareness with each active recalling of it. And so the more repetitions you do of that process, the smaller the distance it becomes to get it out of your long-term memory. And so the easier it becomes. And so that brings me on to my next point, finding the technique that works for you. By the time you get into year 11, you should know which revision technique you're going to be using. Specifically, which active recall technique you're going to be using. There are loads of different active recall techniques you can use, so there will be one that works for you. You just have to do the work, ideally in year 10, to find out which one. The reality is, most of them will probably work just fine, so it won't take that long to find the right one. And on top of that, because they all use the same principle of active recall, the quickest way to find the right one that works for you is just to choose the one that's most similar to what you're already doing. For example, if you're used to just making notes, then you can try making flashcards or making summary notes on a piece of information that you've just read without looking back at the information though. Or if you're used to watching videos, then you can try and explain the content to someone else the same way the video does for you. I knew that whenever I had done a revision before GCSE, it was always making notes. So I tried flashcards and it just clicked. And I actually got quite good at it and it carried me to the grades that I got. So if you're interested in learning the same techniques that got me the grades that I got at A-level in GCSE and you want to implement them into your own GCSE game, then click the first link in the description for 1 month of free one-to-one tutoring with me.
By the way, that's only available for the next 7 days.
Even if flashcards don't work for you, I'll help you find the revision technique that does work for you, even if you're already in year 11. And I'll apply the same principles to you as I did for my flashcards. And on top of that, you'll get access to a whole community. That means making posts, communicating with other members, buying extra calls from me or direct messaging, video tutorials on specific areas that you're struggling, and much more to come. The next point that I cannot stress enough is exam practice. Too many students forget that they can practice the exact same skills that they're going to need in the exam over and over and over. They still don't put enough effort into it. You cannot expect yourself to do well in an exam, or at least as good as you could have, if you just do a load of content revision but no exam practice. It's like learning all the theory and how to drive a car and then coming to your driving test expecting yourself to do well even though you haven't even actually driven a car before. It just doesn't work like that. You need to set aside enough time before the exam to do both content revision and especially exam practice. Yes, while I agree that you cannot really do exam questions before learning and understanding the content first, they definitely should not be neglected. The final point that I'll talk about is spaced repetition. This is a science-proved method and it works especially well for flashcards, but can work for other methods too. It involves going over more difficult and more novice information more frequently, and then over time gradually building up the difference in time between each time revisiting the content. So that might mean with a flashcard, might mean going over that same flashcard back to back to back to back. But then eventually once you start to get a grasp of what the content is, you can leave a few flashcards between each revisit, and then a few more flashcards, and then a few days, and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you just remember it like that.